The sky was dark like an omen. Earth had always looked peaceful from space, a blue and green jewel in the endless black. But now something was wrong. The stars that had once been a distant mystery now seemed closer, threatening. Humanity had never been part of the galactic community. For centuries, Earth had been a quiet planet, unaware of the vast, dangerous universe beyond. People lived their lives in peace, oblivious to the fact that the stars were full of predators waiting to strike. But that peace was about to end. The Galactic had come. A race of reptilian conquerors, the Galactic were known across the galaxy for their brutal tactics and merciless nature. They took what they wanted, planets, resources, people, and left nothing behind but ashes. Entire civilizations had been wiped out without a second thought. They had destroyed hundreds of worlds, crushing species weaker than themselves. Earth was just another target on their map. It all began with the arrival of a single ship. The Galactic warship, the Solstice, entered Earth's atmosphere with a deadly silence. At first, it seemed small against the vastness of the sky, but that quickly changed as it grew larger and larger, filling the entire horizon. It was as though the heavens themselves were being consumed by this giant metallic beast. It was a ship like no other, a massive dark structure that seemed to swallow the light around it. The Galactic did not come in peace. They came with fire and fury, their weapons ready to burn Earth to the ground. Their message, transmitted to every major city on the planet, was simple: surrender or perish. The world didn't know how to respond. Governments, military leaders, and ordinary citizens alike were paralyzed by fear. No one had ever expected this day to come. Humanity had no way of knowing how to fight a force like this. The Galactic were far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. Their ships were larger than any human creation, their weapons more powerful than any technology the humans possessed. And yet there was something in the air, something unspoken but real, a feeling of defiance. A whisper that started in the hearts of the people and spread like wildfire: we will not bow down. The first shots were fired from the Galactic warship as it hovered in Earth's orbit. It wasn't a warning, it was an execution. From the Solstice, a beam of energy ripped through the air, striking the surface of the planet. It hit a city in the middle of the ocean, and in an instant the city was gone, nothing but vaporized ruins. Thousands of lives snuffed out in the blink of an eye. Humanity stood at the brink of annihilation. The world held its breath, waiting for the next move. But the Galactic made one fatal mistake. They thought humanity would stay quiet. They thought the humans would surrender. They had never met a species like Earth's. In the depths of the United Nations Command Center, a woman stood tall, Admiral Jessica Foster, the commander of Earth's fleet. She had spent her life preparing for this moment, though no one had ever expected it to come like this. As she watched the destruction unfold on the screen, her heart burned with rage. They don't know us, she thought bitterly. They think we're weak. They think we'll kneel before them. Her fist slammed onto the table, the metal echoing in the quiet room. She looked up at her team, a group of men and women who had trained for years, preparing for a war no one had ever imagined. They think we'll stay quiet, Admiral Foster said, her voice icy. They're wrong, we fight now and we win. The command center was filled with the hum of activity. Earth's military forces, once scattered and divided, now rallied as one. People who had once bickered over politics, borders, and resources now set aside their differences for the one cause that mattered: survival. Every nation on Earth came together, putting aside everything to defend their home. Admiral Foster's voice rang out across the command center. Activate the defense grid, launch all satellites, prepare our warships. They won't take us without a fight. The first wave of human counterattacks was swift. Military bases around the world, built up over decades of global peace, became the heart of the fight. Every missile silo, every fighter jet, every ground soldier was mobilized. The Earth may not have had the technology or the numbers the Galactic possessed, but humanity had something stronger: determination, unity, and an unbreakable will to survive. It began with the activation of Earth's orbital defense grid, which had been built in secret for years. The Galactic hadn't expected the humans to have anything that could challenge them, but they were wrong. From space, hundreds of missiles armed with quantum warheads streaked toward the Galactic warship, the Solstice. The alien ship tried to retaliate, firing a barrage of its own deadly beams, but the humans had been waiting. Their ships, fast and agile, flew in patterns they couldn't predict. The Galactic had underestimated the humans' ability to fight back. The missiles hit their mark. The Galactic warship shuddered, its hull cracking as explosions tore through its engines. The Solstice groaned, damaged but not destroyed. But the damage was done. The Galactic fleet, already on the move to bring reinforcements, hesitated. They hadn't expected resistance. They hadn't expected this kind of fight. Humanity had awakened, and the Calathri were about to learn the hard way that underestimating humans was the gravest mistake they could make. The skies above Earth were filled with fire and destruction. The air smelled of metal and burning ozone. Humans were no longer helpless, no longer quiet. They had drawn a line in the sand, and they would fight for their home. And in that moment, with the Earth trembling beneath their feet, one thing became clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity would not go quietly into the night. The war for Earth had begun. The Calathri warship, the Solstice, was wounded, but it wasn't finished. The aliens had underestimated humanity's strength and resolve, but they weren't going to back down. Earth had struck a first blow, but this battle was just beginning. The Calathri fleet, massive and unrelenting, began to converge on Earth. It was like a swarm of predators, hungry for the kill. In the cold expanse of space, hundreds of ships moved in perfect formation, their weapons powered up and ready to devastate. Admiral Jessica Foster stood on the command deck of the Vengeance, Earth's flagship, looking out at the stars. She could feel the weight of the moment, the weight of her people's hopes, the lives of billions resting on her shoulders. She knew this was only the beginning. The Calathri were not just going to leave after one strike. They would come at Earth with everything they had. "They're coming," Lieutenant Marlowe said, his voice shaking with anxiety. His eyes were glued to the screens, watching as the enemy ships filled the view. "We know," Foster said, her voice calm, though her hands clenched into fists. She had a fire in her heart, but she had learned long ago that panic led to mistakes. She wasn't about to make any now. The command center was a hive of activity, orders flowing from one officer to the next. Outside the massive window, Earth's defenses were being activated. Missiles were ready to be launched, satellites locked in position, and human warships began to take their places in orbit, ready to defend the planet. Admiral Foster turned to her tactical officer. "Status on our fleet." "We have 5 warships in orbit, Admiral, and 5 more on the way. Our defenses are fully operational. We're ready." Foster nodded, but inside she was nervous. 5 ships were nothing compared to the massive Calathri armada. If they didn't make a move now, the enemy would overwhelm them. "We can't wait for them to come to us," she said, her voice low but determined. "Prepare for a counterattack. We'll meet them in the void." Her crew exchanged glances, but they didn't question her. There was no time for doubt. They knew what was at stake. The first Calathri strike hit at dawn. The sky over Earth began to burn as their warships unleashed hell. The explosion shook the ground, rattling buildings, and sending waves of panic through the cities below. But it wasn't just one attack. The Calathri fired again and again, each shot a death sentence for anything in its path. A communications satellite exploded in space. Another blast ripped through the atmosphere, and across the globe, human cities trembled under the pressure. "They're targeting our cities," Marlowe said, his voice tight with fear. Foster gritted her teeth. "They'll regret that." With a sharp motion, she turned to her crew. "Send the orders to all ships. We launch now." It was a gamble, but humans had always been good at betting on their survival. In the vastness of space, the Vengeance and its fleet moved forward, cutting through the void like a blade. They were outnumbered, but they weren't afraid. Human ships were smaller, faster, and more agile than the lumbering Calathri vessels. And most importantly, they were driven by something the Calathri couldn't understand: hope, pride, and the desire to protect their home. The first Calathri ship that came into range was massive, its jagged, dark hull a symbol of the invaders' power. But it was no match for the speed of Earth's fleet. The Vengeance and its allies darted in, weapons blazing. The sound of weapons charging filled the command deck. It was the thunder before the storm. "Fire!" Foster shouted. The human ships unleashed a volley of energy blasts, each one striking their target with deadly precision. The first Calathri warship's shields buckled under the onslaught. The next moment, its engines exploded in a fiery burst. The ship was no more. The humans had landed their first victory. But the Calathri did not retreat. Their retaliation was swift and brutal. The remaining ships fired in unison, their weapons a bright flash of destruction. The Solstice, though damaged, led the charge, releasing another deadly beam aimed straight at the human fleet. It struck one of Earth's warships, the Freedom, tearing through its hull and splitting it in two. The ship crumpled in space, debris spinning out in all directions. The sight of the ship's destruction sent a wave of grief through Admiral Foster, but it didn't break her. It fueled her. "Focus fire on the Solstice," she ordered, her voice cold and steady. "We take down the head of the snake." The battle intensified as the human fleet closed in on the Calathri flagship. Explosions lit up the void. Earth's ships dodged and weaved, using their speed and agility to avoid the deadly blasts from the Calathree weapons. But there was no denying the price they were paying. With every ship they destroyed, the Calathree retaliated in kind, their numbers overwhelming the humans. Foster gripped the edge of the command chair, her knuckles white. She saw it all in her mind, the world they were fighting for, her people, her family. "We can't let them win," she whispered to herself. "We can't." The Vengeance flew forward, its powerful engines roaring as it moved in on the solstice. It was a suicide mission, but there was no turning back now. Foster knew that if she hesitated, they would lose. The two ships collided in the darkness of space, a massive explosion of energy as they met. The Vengeance was struck by the full force of the Solstice's weapon, its shields flickering under the impact. But the Vengeance didn't falter. It pressed on, using its maneuverability to stay close, avoiding the enemy's heavy fire. "Target their engines," Foster ordered, her voice sharp with determination. "Take them down." The crew obeyed without question. Every moment was a battle, every second a test of endurance. The Vengeance dodged a beam of energy from the Calathree ship, getting close enough to launch a barrage of missiles directly into the Solstice's power core. The explosion was deafening. For a moment, the universe seemed to hold its breath. Then the massive Calathree warship staggered, its engines sputtering, its massive form splitting apart. The Solstice was gone. But the Calathree were not done. They still had numbers, they still had firepower. Admiral Foster didn't have time to rest. There were more ships coming, and their strength would only grow. She turned to her crew, looking at each of them with a fire that burned brighter than any explosion in space. "We've only just begun," she said, her voice steady. "They think they can break us, but we'll show them that humanity is not a species to be crushed." The battle raged on. The stakes were higher than ever, but the humans were ready. They had taken the first step in the war for Earth, and they would not stop until victory was theirs. For Earth, for their families, for their future. They would fight and they would win. The battle above Earth had only just begun, but already the ground was littered with the wreckage of warships, both human and alien. The Calathree had come to conquer, to bring their might to bear on Earth. But in their underestimation of humanity, they had miscalculated. The first blow had been struck, and now the war would take a darker, more dangerous turn. Admiral Jessica Foster stood before the command screen of the Vengeance, the flames of the battle outside flickering across her face. She was breathing heavily, the tension in her chest tight as she watched the massive Calathree fleet, still swarming around Earth's orbit. It had been a bloodied first victory, but humanity was far from safe. The Calathree were relentless, and their numbers were overwhelming. She turned to her officers, her voice unwavering despite the exhaustion she felt. "We've lost ships, but we've also sent a message. The Calathree know now that we're not an easy target, but we need more." Marlowe, her tactical officer, nodded gravely. "They're coming in waves, Admiral. It's only a matter of time before they regroup and hit us harder. We need more firepower to stand a chance." Foster looked out at the stars, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. They had few resources left, and many of Earth's warships had already been crippled in the battle. But there was one thing humans had that the Calathree didn't: unity. Their armies and fleets, once divided by politics and differences, were now united under one common banner: the defense of Earth. "Call in every reserve ship," Foster commanded, her voice steady but fierce. "We fight for Earth now. All nations, all powers, every last ship, bring them here. We will show them what happens when they underestimate humanity." The officers on the command deck quickly set to work, contacting Earth's military forces across the globe. They had little time to spare, but Foster knew that they couldn't wait for reinforcements. They needed to act fast. On the ground, the mood was grim but determined. The world had watched as the first wave of the Calathree attack had left devastation in its wake. Cities had been bombed. Families had been torn apart. Yet across the globe, there was a growing sense of unity. The threat was real, but so was the strength of humanity. In every military base, in every command center, the call to arms was made. Weapons were readied. Warships were mobilized. Nations that had once bickered and fought over petty issues now stood side by side, ready to protect their home. From every corner of Earth, ships began to rise into the heavens. Some were hastily refitted civilian vessels, others were the last of Earth's top-tier warships, and still others were newly constructed in secret military facilities, built for moments like this. There was no hesitation now, only a shared understanding that humanity's survival depended on this fight. The first new ship to join Earth's fleet was the Defiant, a massive vessel, armed with weapons and shields designed to turn the tide. It came out of the shadows of Earth's atmosphere and joined the Vengeance in orbit, its cannons aimed at the Cala-3 invaders. "Admiral, we've received word from the Defiant," Marlowe said. "They're ready to engage." Foster nodded, her eyes flashing with determination. "Send the signal. Tell them to hold formation and prepare for an offensive strike. We're going to give the Cala-3 a taste of what it means to fight humanity." One by one, more ships arrived. The Maverick, the Sentinel, the Righteous Fury all joined the battle, forming a fleet that began to rival the Cala-3 in size. The humans were still outnumbered, but their resolve was stronger than ever. They were fighting for their world, for their people, for their future. The Cala-3 warlords watched as the human fleet grew. Their confidence began to waver, but they refused to retreat. Their orders were clear: destroy Earth, no matter the cost. The battle raged across space, ships darting in and out of combat, exchanging blows of fire and fury. Each explosion lit up the darkness like a star dying. The Cala-3 retaliated with overwhelming force, but the human fleet had learned, adapted, and become stronger with each engagement. "All ships focus fire on their flagship," Foster ordered, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We take out their command ship and the rest will fall." The flagship, the Solstice, had been crippled in the earlier battle but remained operational, its alien weapons continuing to fire. The Cala-3 weren't going down without a fight, but neither were the humans. They were relentless now. Human warships swarmed the Cala-3 flagship like bees to a hive. The ships darted in and out, delivering precise strikes to the enemy vessel. It was a game of survival, each ship using every bit of its firepower to hold the line. "Captain, we've lost contact with the Titan," one of the officers on the Vengeance said, voice trembling. "They were hit hard by the Cala-3's heavy fire. It's not responding." Admiral Foster clenched her jaw. She had to keep moving forward. "We can't afford to mourn right now," she said. "Focus on the mission, push forward." But even as the human fleet fought bravely, the Cala-3 pushed back harder, sending reinforcements from their hidden stations in the far reaches of space. More and more ships appeared on the horizon, their guns blazing with an intensity that shook the very fabric of space. The battle seemed endless. Every minute felt like an eternity as both sides tore into each other with everything they had. The Cala-3's strength was still formidable, but humanity's resilience was something they could not understand. Suddenly, a shout from Marlowe snapped everyone's attention back to the command deck. "Admiral, we've detected a new threat, something massive. It's coming from the edge of the fleet." The Cala-3 had deployed their final weapon, a monstrous warship larger than anything the humans had seen before. It was an unstoppable force, a behemoth with weaponry that could annihilate anything in its path. It was the last of the Cala-3's reinforcements, their final effort to crush Earth. Foster's heart pounded in her chest as she turned to face the enemy ship on the screen. "This is it. All ships prepare to engage. We either stop them now or we lose everything." The human fleet, though battered and scarred, charged forward with a fury that shook the stars. They were going to destroy this new threat, no matter the cost. The world below, the families, the cities, every single life on Earth depended on their success. With a final roar, the human fleet collided with the Cala-3 behemoth, a battle that would decide the fate of Earth itself. It wasn't just a war for survival anymore. It was a war for everything humanity had ever dreamed of. And they would not lose. The battle above Earth had reached a fever pitch. The human fleet, battered and bruised, faced off against the Cala-3's massive warship, the Juggernaut. It loomed on the edge of space, its enormous hull bristling with weapons capable of annihilating entire fleets in a single strike. Every ship in the human fleet had suffered damage, yet they pushed forward, driven by something the Cala-3 couldn't understand, an unyielding will to protect their home. Admiral Jessica Foster stood at the command center of the Vengeance, watching the chaotic battlefield unfold. The stars outside were a kaleidoscope of fire and destruction. Earth's atmosphere shimmered with the shockwaves of every explosion, and the sounds of combat filled the ship's communications system. The Juggernaut was unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. Its massive size dwarfed every ship in the fleet. Its weapons fired with the power to obliterate anything in their path, and yet, despite all of it, the humans didn't flinch. They had no choice but to fight. "Admiral, their main cannons are charging," Marlowe, the tactical officer, called out. "If they fire, it could destroy our entire fleet in one shot." Foster's heart raced, but she didn't show it. The pressure of the situation was immense, yet there was no time for hesitation. She knew what needed to be done. "All ships break formation, split up, use our speed to our advantage." The Vengeance swerved sharply, narrowly avoiding the blast of the Cala-3's massive energy beam. It seared through space, and for a moment everything was silent, nothing but the echoes of that terrifying power. Foster's hand tightened around the armrest of her chair. They were running out of time. The Calathri had thrown everything they had at Earth. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for freedom, for their very existence. Every soldier, every pilot, every ship was now part of a desperate struggle that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. "Admiral," Marlowe said again, his voice tight with panic. "The Juggernaut's cannon is almost ready to fire. We need a plan now." Foster's mind raced. There was no perfect solution, no way to fight this monster head-on and survive. But they couldn't give up, not now. "Target their engines," she barked. "If we can take out their propulsion, they'll be dead in space. All ships concentrate fire on the rear of the Juggernaut, full power." The fleet's ships, though wounded and exhausted, responded in unison. The human ships surged forward, their cannons firing relentlessly, slamming into the rear of the Calathri warship. But the Juggernaut was tough, and its shields absorbed most of the blasts. The human fleet had to keep pushing, knowing that if they didn't find a weakness soon, it would be too late. Another blast from the Calathri ship rang out, shaking the Vengeance to its core. Sparks flew from the ceiling as the ship groaned under the pressure. Officers scrambled to their stations, trying to keep the ship intact. "Report," Foster shouted. "Shields are at 30%, came the response. "We've lost the starboard engines. The Vengeance is barely holding together." Her mind raced. 30% shields, a crippled ship, but there was no choice now. Earth's survival depended on them. She gritted her teeth. "Keep firing, keep moving. We don't stop until that ship is dead." The crew of the Vengeance didn't hesitate. They fired again and again, the ship's weapons screaming as they tore through space. But the Juggernaut wasn't going down easily. Its shields absorbed the blasts, and its retaliatory fire was devastating. Every ship that came close to it was met with a burst of energy that sent them spiraling into the black void, their systems failing. It was then that something unexpected happened. A new ship appeared in the distance, moving quickly toward the battlefield. At first, it looked like another Calathri reinforcement. But as it came closer, human recognition set in. It was the Defiant, the largest warship Earth had ever built, fully reinforced and ready for battle. The Defiant had been Earth's last hope, a ship built for moments like this. It had been delayed by repairs, but now it arrived, just in time to change the tide of the battle. "Admiral," Marlowe shouted, his voice filled with disbelief. "The Defiant has arrived. They're joining the fight." Foster didn't have time to smile, but a flicker of hope sparked in her chest. She had known this day would come, when Earth's greatest weapon would finally be ready. And now it had come. "Take the Defiant's position," Foster ordered. "Get them in line with the fleet. We need their firepower now." The Defiant aligned with the Vengeance and the remaining human ships, adding its massive cannons to the barrage aimed at the Juggernaut. The new ship's weapons fired with a ferocity that shook the very fabric of space. Massive energy blasts hit the Calathri warship, causing its shields to flicker, and for the first time the Juggernaut seemed to stagger. The Calathri warlords aboard the ship had underestimated the power of humanity. They thought their massive warship would be enough to break Earth's will. But now, they could see that the humans had something far stronger, something they hadn't expected. "Admiral, we're getting a message from the Juggernaut," said a communications officer, her voice tense. Foster's eyes narrowed. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and the image of a Calathri commander appeared. His cold, reptilian eyes locked onto Foster's. "You fought well, human," the Calathri said in a low, guttural voice. "But this is where your defiance ends. You will kneel before us, or your planet will be destroyed." Foster's face hardened. "You don't understand," she said, her voice as cold as steel. "We will never kneel." Before the Calathri could respond, she turned to her crew. "Increase power to all weapons. We break them now, no more games." With the Defiant joining the fight, the human fleet pushed harder. Each ship fired relentlessly, pounding the Juggernaut with everything they had. The battle raged on, but now there was no hesitation. Humanity was no longer just surviving, they were fighting back with everything they had. The Calathri warship, its shields failing and its engines faltering, began to show signs of vulnerability. The Vengeance and Defiant led the charge, focusing their fire on the Calathri flagship's exposed weaknesses. Another massive explosion rocked the Juggernaut. This time, the Calathri flagship didn't recover. The ship's engines flared once more, then sputtered out. Its weapons went silent. The Juggernaut was crippled. Admiral Foster didn't let up. She knew this was only a small victory. There were still more Calathri ships to defeat, more battles to win. But the humans had shown them something the Calathri had never expected, a spirit that couldn't be broken. As the Juggernaut drifted into the void, defeated and helpless, Foster allowed herself a single moment of relief. It wasn't over yet, but Earth had taken a huge step towards survival. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to hope. The Juggernaut was down, its massive form floating lifeless in space, but the battle was far from over. The Calathri were relentless, and though their flagship had fallen, the remaining ships were still dangerous. They were still a threat. The alien invaders, stunned by humanity's defiance, had no intention of retreating. Their warlords were too proud to admit defeat. Admiral Jessica Foster stood at the helm of the Vengeance, her mind racing. The enemy fleet still outnumbered Earth's forces, but the human fleet had gained momentum. The arrival of the Defiant had tipped the balance, and now, with the Juggernaut crippled, Earth's forces were moving in for the kill. "Admiral, we've received multiple enemy reinforcements," Lieutenant Marlowe reported, his voice tight. "They're arriving faster than we anticipated. There's no time to rest." Foster's jaw tightened. She had known this wouldn't be easy. The Calathri were like wolves. If you injured one, the others would strike harder. But this time, humanity wasn't going to back down. They had shown the Calathri that they could bleed, but they could also make the enemy bleed harder. "Prepare the fleet for another push," Foster ordered. "All ships move into battle formation. We're not letting them regroup." Her voice was calm, but inside, a storm of emotions raged. The destruction on Earth had been devastating, and the lives lost were too many to count. But humanity, Will was unshakable. She could feel it in her bones. They had already sacrificed so much. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was a fight for their home, their future, and the future of every human who had ever lived. Down below, Earth cities were still smoldering from the initial attacks. The world's population watched in silence, holding their breath as the fate of their planet hung in the balance. The news channels, once filled with panic and despair, now broadcast the victories of the human fleet. Hope was returning. Every man, woman, and child knew this battle was the turning point. If they lost, humanity would be crushed. If they won, they would send a message that would echo across the galaxy for centuries to come. In the streets, soldiers from every nation worked together, preparing for what might come next. The war was not just fought in space. It was fought in the hearts of every human being. Unity, once a distant dream, had become the one thing that would carry them through the darkest days of their existence. Back in space, the Vengeance and the Defiant led the charge, their weapons blazing as they tore through the remaining Calathri ships. The sound of battle was deafening, a constant roar of energy blasts and explosions. It felt as though the universe itself was holding its breath, waiting for the final verdict. "Admiral, the Calathri flagship is gone," Marlowe said, "but they're still fighting with everything they have." Foster's eyes narrowed. The Calathri may have lost their flagship, but their pride would push them to fight to the bitter end. They had no choice now. They couldn't afford to lose face. The human ships closed in, their weapons firing in synchronized rhythm. Foster could see the flashes of destruction across the black expanse of space, but she couldn't afford to let her attention waver. This was it, the final stretch. The Calathri were vulnerable, but they wouldn't go down without dragging Earth ships down with them. "We're taking heavy fire from their remaining warships," one of the officers shouted. "We've lost the Sentinel, it's gone." The loss of another ship felt like a punch to the gut. Foster gritted her teeth. She didn't have time to mourn, not now. "Keep pushing forward," she barked. "Focus on their engines, we end this now." The fleet responded, moving in unison, determined to finish what had been started. The Calathri were breaking, but they still had firepower and they knew how to use it. Their ships were circling in tight formation, hopping to overwhelm the human fleet with sheer numbers. But the humans had learned. Each ship, each crew member was fighting with a purpose that the Calathri couldn't match. The Defiant fired its massive cannons, sending shockwaves through space. The shots hit their targets with devastating force, tearing apart Calathri ships one by one. But the Calathri weren't done yet. Their retaliation was swift and brutal. The Vengeance shook as a massive beam of energy struck it directly. The shields flickered and sputtered, holding just long enough to prevent total destruction. "Shields down to 10%, Marlowe reported, his voice strained. "If we take another hit, we're done." Foster's hands tightened on the armrests. The ship was battered, but it wasn't finished. She wasn't finished. "Get us into position," she shouted. "We're not backing down, we're finishing this." The Vengeance surged forward, its weapons firing with the last reserves of power. The remaining Calathri warships were no longer working together. They were desperate, panicked. The human fleet had gained the upper hand. Down on Earth, the people were watching through every available screen. They could see the battle unfolding in space. Some had already begun to celebrate, thinking the fight was over. But the war was far from done. The Calathri had been pushed back, but they were far from defeated. The humans knew they couldn't stop fighting until every last alien ship was destroyed. There was no other choice. "We've lost contact with the Freedom," came another report from the Vengeance. "It's gone, Admiral." Foster's heart clenched. So many lives. The names of the fallen would never be forgotten, but there was no time for sorrow. If they stopped now, the Calathri would regroup, and humanity's sacrifices would be in vain. "Keep moving," Foster shouted again. "We do this for everyone we've lost. We do this for Earth." The human fleet pushed harder, their ships relentless in their pursuit of victory. The Calathri were no longer a unified force. They were scrambling to save what little remained. Foster could see it in their movements. The invaders were broken. The Vengeance aimed one final shot at the last Calathri flagship's engines. The energy blast was bright enough to light up the entire expanse of space. It struck the alien ship dead center, and the explosion that followed was like a star-going supernova. The Calathri flagship disintegrated, leaving only a cloud of debris in its place. There was a moment of silence. The war had ended. On Earth, the world held its breath. Then, like a wave crashing against the shore, a roar of relief and celebration erupted. It was impossible to contain. The war was over. Humanity had won. But in that moment of victory, as Earth's fleet pulled back and the remnants of the Calathri were vanquished, Admiral Foster stood in the command center, her eyes fixed on the stars. She had won, yes, but the cost had been immense. The losses were too many to count. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they would not go quietly. They had fought with everything they had, and they had won for Earth, for their families, for the future. And as the last of the Calathri ships drifted into the void, one thing was clear. No one would ever underestimate humanity again. The battle was over, or so it seemed. The wreckage of Calathri warships floated lifelessly in space, their once proud forms now shattered and broken. The Vengeance and the Defiant hung in the void, their guns silent for the first time in hours. The Earth fleet had won the day, but the price had been steep. Ships were lost, crew members gone. The skies above Earth were still burning from the earlier strikes, and the world's cities, though still standing, were scarred by the devastation. The cost of this victory weighed heavily on Admiral Jessica Foster. She stood in the command center of the Vengeance, her face a mask of exhaustion, but inside a storm of emotions raged. Her crew, too, were spent, physically and mentally drained, but they had held on, fought hard, and now they had won, or so they thought. "Admiral, we've received a transmission from the Calathri High Command," Lieutenant Marlowe said, his voice grim. Foster's eyes snapped to him. "What do they want?" "We thought they were finished," Marlowe continued, "but they're not. They're launching one final assault." Foster's stomach dropped. "How? We've destroyed their fleet, their flagship." "There's more, Admiral. There's a second fleet, hidden in the outer reaches of the system." The words hit Foster like a punch to the chest. The Calathri had been hiding a final weapon, a force that had been waiting in the shadows out of Earth's reach. She knew what it meant. The war wasn't over. It couldn't be. The Calathri were making their final stand, and they had something far worse in mind than a simple battle. "How long until they arrive?" she asked, her voice calm but her mind racing. "Hours, if not less, and their fleet is even bigger than the one we just fought. We're going to need every ship we can get to stand a chance." Foster's heart clenched. She had expected retaliation, but this was beyond anything she'd prepared for. Humanity had fought with everything they had, and now it seemed like it was all about to slip away. But the thing about humanity, about the people she commanded, was that they didn't stop fighting, not when their backs were against the wall. She turned, her gaze sweeping across her crew, all of them waiting for her to speak, to lead. She felt the weight of every decision, every life that had been lost, but she couldn't hesitate. "Prepare the fleet. I want every ship at full readiness. And get me Earth command. We're going to need every nation to give us everything they've got. This is it." Down on Earth, the people were still reeling from the earlier devastation. The cities were scarred, the skies darkened by the remains of the Calathri fleet. But there was something else now, something stronger than fear. It was a sense of unity, a shared belief that no matter what, Earth would not fall. The message was clear, and it spread across the world like wildfire. They would fight. They would survive. In every city, every military base, the same thing was happening. People were coming together, prepared to do whatever it took to protect their home. The streets that had once been filled with uncertainty now rang with the sound of hope. No one was willing to let the Calathri win, not after everything they had endured. "We're going to need everything you've got," Earth's leaders had said in their broadcasts. "All ships, all resources, we stand together or we fall alone." And humanity had answered the call. As the final Calathri fleet approached, Earth's forces came together. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice. The seconds stretched on like hours. Foster stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of space. The new Galactic fleet was coming fast, a storm of death and destruction. It was massive, far larger than anything humanity had faced before. This wasn't just a battle anymore. This was the final fight. If they didn't win this, Earth would fall. "Admiral, the enemy fleet is entering the system. They're coming in fast. We don't have much time," Marlowe called from his station. Foster clenched her fists, her jaw set in determination. She had lost ships, lost friends. She had seen Earth burn. But now there was no more retreat, no more hesitation. This was the moment she had been preparing for since the first Galactic ship had arrived. "Get ready, people. This is it," she said, her voice ringing with authority. The human fleet moved into position. The Vengeance and the Defiant led the charge, their weapons primed and ready. Behind them, a wave of human ships moved into formation, prepared for a fight that would determine the fate of their home. The Galactic fleet, vast and menacing, advanced without fear. Their ships moved like a wall of darkness, each one bristling with weapons ready to tear Earth apart. The human fleet was smaller, but it was united, determined. The gap between the two forces closed rapidly. "All ships open fire," Foster commanded. The first shots rang out in space, the bright bursts of energy illuminating the void. Humanity's fleet struck with everything they had, their weapons blasting across the stars. The Galactic retaliated immediately, their energy beams lashing out with terrifying force. The battle that followed was a symphony of destruction. Human ships danced through the stars, firing their weapons with deadly precision. Galactic warships exploded in the blackness of space, but the alien fleet pressed on, relentless. One of the Galactic ships broke through the human line and came straight for the Vengeance, its massive cannons aimed directly at the flagship. Foster's heart raced. The Vengeance was already battered and the ship's shields were low. If the Galactic struck now, it could be the end. "Brace for impact," Foster shouted. The ship shook as the Galactic ship's blast hit them. Sparks flew, and the ship groaned under the strain. The lights flickered as the crew scrambled to maintain control. "Shields are at 5%, Admiral," a technician shouted. "We can't take much more." Foster's hands gripped the console, her mind racing. They couldn't give up now, not after everything. "Focus fire on their engines. Take them down now," she commanded. The Vengeance fired once more, its weapons landing with devastating precision. The Galactic ship exploded in a blaze of light, its enormous hull breaking apart, but the battle raged on. All around them, ships were falling, human and Galactic alike. The sound of explosions reverberated through the empty void of space. But amidst the chaos, the human fleet held strong. They had made it this far. They wouldn't let Earth fall now. Foster watched the battle unfold before her, every second a lifetime. Her heart pounded in her chest. This was the moment that would define humanity's place in the galaxy. Would they fall, or would they prove that they were more than just survivors? They would rise. They had to. The Galactic fleet was slowing, faltering, their pride finally breaking under the weight of humanity's will. The tide was turning, and with one final, decisive push, the humans gave everything they had left. The last of the Galactic ships exploded, their massive fleet reduced to nothing. The battle was over. For Earth, for humanity, they had won. The stars had gone quiet, their brilliance almost drowned out by the echoes of war. The battle was over, and the universe held its breath as the remnants of the Galactic fleet floated in the cold void of space. Earth's fleet, battered but unbroken, hovered over the planet they had sworn to protect. The cost of victory had been high, too high, but humanity had triumphed. They had defeated the Galactic, crushed the invaders who had once believed Earth would fall without a fight. Admiral Jessica Foster stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, her hands gripping the console in front of her. The ship had been damaged, its shields barely functional and its weapons systems crippled. But the most significant damage had been the lives lost, the crew members who had fought with everything they had, only to never see their families again. Their faces haunted her. Admiral, Marlowe's voice broke through her thoughts. "The battle is over, the Galactic are retreating, the fleet is. It's done." Foster didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the view of Earth below, the clouds still burning in places, the cities scarred by the fires of war. But the lights were on. People were alive. Humanity was alive. They had held on. And in doing so, they had sent a message to the galaxy, a message of defiance, of strength, and of unwavering will. She turned to Marlowe, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "How many did we lose?" Marlowe's expression softened. "Too many to count, Admiral. The Titan, the Freedom, the Maverick. We lost a lot of ships, the cost. It's more than we imagined, but we held them off. Foster's chest tightened. The faces of the fallen flashed before her. She had known the risks. She had known the price of war. But no amount of preparation could have prepared her for the weight of so much loss. She knew that the world would mourn. They would rebuild, but the scars would remain. Earth is still standing, Foster said, her voice hoarse but with a thread of pride running through it. We didn't give up. We didn't bend. We didn't break. Her words were quiet, but they held more meaning than anything she had ever said. Earth had stood up to a force far greater than anything they had ever imagined, and they had defeated it. In doing so, they had proven something to the galaxy, that humanity was not a species to be underestimated. They were a force of nature. On Earth, the world erupted in celebration. The battle had been long and the victory had come at a cost, but the people of Earth were alive. They had faced an enemy that seemed unbeatable and had driven it away. The news channels broadcasted images of the human fleet victorious in space, of the Galactic ships drifting into nothingness, their lights flickering out. Families gathered around their televisions, holding their loved ones tight, knowing that their future was now secure. The streets of cities around the globe were filled with people cheering, hugging, crying for the soldiers who wouldn't be coming home, crying for the families torn apart by the war, but also crying for the victory they had earned. The Earth was scarred, but it was alive. In every nation, governments came together to rebuild. The world had been united by a common enemy, and now it would be united in recovery. People who had once fought amongst themselves put aside old grudges to face the future. The loss was immense, but the strength of humanity's spirit shone through. Back aboard the Vengeance, Foster felt the weight of the silence in the command center. The crew, though exhausted, shared a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had done it. They had saved Earth. They had stopped the Galactic. But the victory felt hollow in her chest. For every fallen soldier, for every ship lost, there was a price they could never pay back. She looked around at the faces of her crew. They were all survivors. They had fought together and they would heal together. Admiral, Marlowe said, his voice tentative. There's something you need to see. We're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Council. Foster's brow furrowed. The Galactic Council. They had been silent during the war, watching from the sidelines as Earth fought for its very existence. Now they wanted to speak. Put it through, Foster said, her voice sharp with curiosity and caution. The screen flickered to life, and for the first time, Foster saw representatives from other alien races, beings she had never imagined. There were towering insectoids, sleek, smooth-skinned species, and others she couldn't even describe. Their eyes were fixed on her, and for a moment she felt like a small human again, just a speck in the vastness of the universe. But the words that followed were not what she expected. Admiral Foster, one of the council members, an alien with pale blue skin and piercing black eyes, spoke with a tone that conveyed both respect and caution. We have watched your people in this war, and we have come to a conclusion. Foster straightened, her hands gripping the edge of the console. What conclusion? That Earth is no longer just a backwater planet, the alien continued. Humanity has proven itself to be a powerful force, a force that cannot be ignored. We offer our support and alliance. Earth is no longer alone. The words hit Foster like a wave crashing against the shore. An alliance with the Galactic Council. She had expected condemnation, dismissal, or even threats, but instead there was an offer of peace, of unity, of respect. Foster swallowed hard, her mind racing. The Galactic had come to conquer, to destroy humanity. But now, the very same galaxy that had turned a blind eye to Earth's existence was extending a hand in peace. It was hard to process, hard to accept, but the offer was real. What do you want from us? Foster asked, her voice steady despite the surprise. The alien's expression softened. What we want is simple. We want you to join us. The galaxy is vast, and together we can be more than just survivors. We can be builders, allies, friends. Earth's strength has earned you a place among the stars. Foster looked out at Earth, her heart swelling with a mix of relief and fear. The human race had fought and bled to prove they belonged. But this was more than she had ever dreamed. We'll think about your offer, Foster said. But know this. Humanity fights for itself. We always have. And if you want us as allies, you'll have to earn our trust just as we've earned ours. The council nodded, understanding in their eyes. We will respect your decision, and we will wait for your answer. As the transmission ended and the screen went dark, Foster turned back to her crew. The room was silent, everyone taking in the enormity of what had just happened. Earth had proven its strength, its resilience, and now the galaxy knew who they were. But this wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. Foster knew that Earth would never be the same again. The war had changed everything. The galaxy had taken notice, and humanity was ready to rise. The Vengeance and the fleet moved away from the wreckage of the Calathri. Earth was alive, its future uncertain but full of possibility. Humanity had won their battle. Now they would face a new challenge, the unknown future that awaited them in the stars. And no matter what came next, one thing was certain. Humanity would never again be underestimated.